welcome back to the channel. So this is part 2 of the beginner's guide for the M4 Sherman, and we're in the primer stage here. So this is a particular type of paint. This isn't just normal paint. Primer is a very good paint to give you a base for your further paint colours. And for what we're doing, olive drab, you can use a number of different colours, but I've gone for a nice light grey. This does two things: gives you a really nice base coat for any colours on top for them to pop and look how they should, but it's also for showing any imperfections on the plastic and on the build. You can see any seam lines you've missed, any glue stains, any extra bits that you need to sand down, gaps, all of that. So it's very good. Now it's more important on aircraft, but it's useful on armour to put a good base coat down. Just showing you here as well, with the primers, you can sand them as well if there's any sort of rough patches. Just sort of very lightly, just buff them down, because you really want the smoothest of smooth coats as you can possibly get for the paint to then come on top. And there's often little flecks that get caught in the paint. This is Mr. Surfacer from a jar finned with levelling thinners from the Guns range, but you could use a Tamiya spray can, you could use Halford's primer or any car automotive primer, anything like that in a spray can. Do it outside, obviously. You want to be very careful of the fumes, don't want to be doing it inside, and you still want to be wearing a face mask if you're outside. And then when you've got this nice coat down, we can start to think about the paint we're going to put on top of it, which will be Tamiya acrylics in this instance. We won't get into the ins and outs of it. They're kind of like a hybrid acrylic, but for layman's terms, we can thin them with water or we can thin them with cellulose thinners. We're going to use Tamiya's X20A, which is their acrylic thinner for their acrylic line of paints, which is the XF range of paints, and that's what we're going to use here. And I'm just showing you there that we're going to put the sand shields or side fenders on, which will cover the tracks. Now these are the rubber tracks, so they're made up, and we saw that in the previous video where we cut a piece out to make them tighter. This is the primer that we've used here as well, and that's also going to be sprayed onto these rubber tracks. Then we're going to paint them a rubber black colour. And it's all again about preparation. So just getting ourselves ready now, getting all the parts off, so the turret, the hull, we've got all the wheels on there, but keeping the tracks separate. And here's a close-up of the tracks as well. You can see there's a little bit of flash there around the, I don't know what they'd be called. For lack of a better term, the gowsers that join the tracks together, these bits that stick outside of the rubber pad. But for this build, it's not a problem. And I'm just showing you here how we would spray them. I'm using my Ultra airbrush here, Infinity Ultra. I think it would be a 0.2 needle, or 0.4 would be better for primer. So then when we've got our primer coat, what we're using here first off is XF62 olive drab. Going straight on with that, thin down with X20A from the Tamiya range, straight out of the bottle, thinned roughly 50-50 or a little bit, thin maybe a little bit more than that. The best way to get a feel for it is just get a test, go back and forth and back and forth. Interestingly, you can see here the trouble I was having initially, not getting a wide coat. That's because I'm using the 0.2 needle. I haven't swapped it out. So if you were using 0.4 needle in the airbrush, or 0.3 or 0.5, anything like that, a little bit bigger, you'll get a wider distribution of the paint, which is much better for doing primer coats, base coats, gloss coats, matte coats, all of that sort of thing, where you want a nice uniform coat all over. If you're going to then try and do sort of freehand camo or detail work with the airbrush, that's when you want to drop down to like a 0.2 needle. You can do it with both. It's just easier to use the correct tool from the beginning. So once we've covered the model with XF62, we're just going to add in a little bit of the dark yellow XF60 into the olive drab paint, which will lighten it and give it a kind of aged look. And you can see the turret has not had that effect, but the hull has. That shows you a difference in the colour. Now this is really just a mist coat. We don't want to go on too heavy. We want that olive drab underneath the darker colour to shine through, but it's about giving an effect. So you can go back and forth with this. You can also lighten this mix again with XF60, so this becomes an even lightened version, and then you can actually do streaks just painting downward lines, straight lines down from the edges of the hole and anywhere where there might be runs. So now we've just got a few photos here showing how I make a paint wet palette. So I'm using the lid here of an old Tupperware, and I'm cut some kitchen roll to fit inside, and then with greaseproof paper we cut a section the same size again as the kitchen paper, and we just lay that on top. Now, greaseproof paper was hard to pin down actually here in the UK. I don't know why, but I was looking for the wrong thing because I think I was probably following an American terminology, but it's greaseproof paper in the UK. Once you lay that on top, what you then want to do is wet the kitchen roll underneath, and that wants to be in a reservoir of water, and that will soak through, just lightly soak through the greaseproof paper. You put your paint on top of the greaseproof paper and it will keep it workable for longer. It will keep the moisture in the paint and stop it from drying out, and it's called a wet palette. There's a selection of the brushes I'm using. So now this is a difficult step for most people, and I'm just using a rubber black colour here. You could use something from the Tamiya range, although they don't brush paint that easily. I think that's a Vallejo colour I've got, and splodge it straight on where you don't want it. Typical, I've done every wheel, and as soon as I turn the camera on I go right over the rim. So we're just trying to paint the rubber wheel that sits up to this rim. You can do this a number of ways. You can keep your wheels separate and use a wheel mask. So you spray them black, put the circle template over them, and then spray them olive drab, and that will give you a nice clean rubber look. Or you can brush paint them, and if you're going to do that, you want a nice wide brush. You don't want to use too small a brush. You want to keep the brush loaded well, keep the paint watered down and thin but not too thin, so we get smooth coats, and then just rest your finger on the model and you should be able to get a nice smooth even coat around and keep the detail. So here we're putting the sand shields on, and I found these quite difficult to fit actually. So if you're going to put these on, you want to just work your way around every point, making sure they're fixed where they're meant to be, and maybe glue one end, even use a bit of super glue just to tack it before the plastic glue goes off, and then work your way around. And you can see some glue stains there, and you can touch that up with the same paint. You might also be able to see some of the streaking I've done there on the side of the hull. Next up, we're doing the Italian scheme. So we want to do a freehand camouflage, which is a bit daunting. You could stop at the previous step and just do a general Sherman. They were all green. But what I've done here is thinned down some XF59. That's the desert yellow, I think it's called. And I'm just going in very close. It's very thin. It's probably 80% thinners or maybe more. Low air pressure, 0.2 needle. And I'm just sketching the lines using the template that's in the instructions and then starting to fill that in. So I'll leave you with this in real time, a little bit of music, just so you can see what my technique is. Unfortunately, because of the angle of the camera, it's difficult to see a lot of what I'm doing, but I'm just building it up very slowly as we go around, and any overspray you can tighten up with the green afterwards. Now you can see just finishing up the turret, just doing that sketching in. You can see how thin the paint is. It's better to go over with 2 or 3 light coats than try and do it all in one coat. And at this stage I wouldn't worry too much about any overspray and the tightness of the camouflage pattern. It can always be cleaned up, and we can also then do this sort of overspraying. So I've mixed up a lighter version of the olive drab again, and I'm just doing a very thin mist coat all over. What that will do is it will cut down on some of the overspray from the camouflage. It will also tie the 2 colours together, so it will mute down the desert camouflage yellow that's on there, and it will tie it in with the olive drab. It's just a nice little technique. After that, it's time for the decals. Now I haven't gone too much into depth here because I've got a separate video showing you how the basics of decals, but these are Tamiya decals, mainly on the turret, and all I've done is put a very nice shiny gloss coat on using X22 from the Tamiya range. I've put the decals on. They are notoriously thick, and you can see the sort of edge of the decal. So once they're on, I've then built up the clear over the top, so more X22, just building it up in light coats, 2 or 3 light coats, and then even sanding a little bit in between just to sort of sand the edge of that clear down. And you're using the gloss to kind of build up an edge and then sanding that back down. You obviously don't need to worry about that too much. Having a nice glossy coat surface for the decals to go on should alleviate many of your problems. But I'll link the video down below and you'll be able to follow that for the basics on applying decals. And lastly there we just saw XF86, which is the flat coat, which I then put on ready for the weathering, which will be in the next video due out next week to follow this one. I'll just leave you with some pictures here, some high-res pictures just showing you the processes that have gone through this build with the camouflage pattern and how it gets tightened up and some of the other things that we've discussed going forward. So as always, thanks for watching. Let me know your comments down below if any of you guys are starting this kit or built it or thinking about building it. If there's any extra hints or tips that you'd like me to do maybe standalone videos for, if there's anything you guys are struggling with, let me know and I'll look to try and put some videos of those together as well. But as always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.